capital goods stocks and power especially all sold off aggressively over the last 1 week or so. There was that story, of course, which talked about Chinese companies being allowed to bid for government contracts in India, and this is, of course, after they were disallowed to do so after the Galwan clashes in 2020. It's all been source-based reporting from various media outlets, but of course, I mean, the damage showed up in stock prices, and names like Hitachi, BHEL, so many CG Power, fair bit of damage occurred after these stories. Renu Baid is with us, Senior Vice President, Research at IIFL Institutional Equities. Renu, good morning. Good to have you with us here. As I said, this has all been source-based reporting. I don't know if you've been able to get some clarity on this first up. We've been trying to talk to companies individually, and some companies have told us that, especially in power transmission, etc., this is true. I mean, it's not without nothing. So just wanted to start there, Renu.
Yeah. Hi, morning. So clearly there has been no government notification of lifting the restrictions. Doesn't seem to be the intention so. But even our interaction with industry experts suggests that in the transmission space, power transmission, high voltage, apparently for reactor category, one of the Chinese manufacturers who are based out of India for over a decade, TBEA, they have been approved for reactors, that too for next financial year. So there have been approval for them. It's not that the restrictions are lifted. So there is no risk of imports here at the moment. But yes, in the transmission space, where players were constrained on capacities and the average pricing in the market have shot very sharply, there we are hearing Chinese players or their factories which are based out in India are now being allowed to participate in future bids.
Any other companies?
Sorry, just one thing, Renu. Just one. You're saying that in high voltage reactors, in transmission.
Yeah, this is for the extra high voltage, 400 and 765 kV.
So this is transformers, just to get it.
These are reactors. The capacity which is used for transformers is also used to make reactors.
I see. Because I saw this reactor bit on social, etc. And well, people were asking whether this is, when you say reactors, you automatically start to put nuclear in front of it.
No.
Yeah. So this is in high voltage transmission. So just to give us a put a name to it, this is the kind that Hitachi, etc. are involved in.
Yeah, in this space, we have Hitachi Energy, GV Vernova T&D. There is CG Power, transformer rectifiers, who are pretty active in this high voltage, extra high voltage space.
And they've been, so this is Chinese companies with facilities in India, manufacturing facilities in India.
So this company called TBEA Energy, they were, as their factories were established in India way back in 2014. And they were very active. They were, in fact, they used to have the market leadership in volume terms with Power Grid then. But after the Galwan clash, Chinese entities were not allowed to participate in India, irrespective of whether they being a local manufacturing entity or not. So this company is very well a domestic company from a local manufacturing footprint perspective. And they have been operating in India since then. They have been exporting, and last few years, they've been supplying to private transmission utilities and exports, though they have not been dealing with directly Power Grid or the state utilities or government contracts, basis the restrictions which were there.
Renu, so now particularly in this segment where TBEA seems to have been approved for a particular project for the next fiscal year, and that is negative for companies like Hitachi, GE, Vernova, T&D. Now with, say, case by case, in the case of, say, TBEA, what would be the market competition now? How would the competitiveness change? Because typically what we hear is that Chinese bids are lower, 10%, 20%, 30%. And plus there is increased competition. So what happens to these companies? And is there any other example where a Chinese company has been appointed for a order?
Well, we still need to see the details. Typically, Chinese players don't have a great track record when it comes to maintaining price discipline. But that was the case during last cycle when demand was extremely weak and there was excess supply in the market. In today's environment, if we count TVA's capacity, which is almost close to 50,000 MVA, the capacity has been very much active in the market. So as a market as a whole, which comprises of public, private and exports, the capacities were already there. So there may not be a nosedive impact on pricing because they are also very well occupied. The factories are full for them. It's just that they'll be now re-entering the government space, that too for reactor as a category to start with. And for a segment, if a private utility was using the capacity earlier, which now will partially be used for the power grid orders, the private utilities which was dependent on or using PBS capacity will now look for other vendors as well. So for a market as a whole, it will take time for prices to moderate. Nonetheless, I would want to highlight that over the last 2 years, most of the capacity expansion which was announced by companies in the space, most of those capacities are coming up for commissioning in the current calendar year. So anyway, the transformer industry supply or manufacturing capacity of transformers is expected to near double in the next 12-15 months. So whether TBA was allowed or not, market prices were expected to correct. It's just that the entry or the announcement of Chinese-owned manufacturers being re-allowed in the market will have a sentiment overhang on the companies. We don't perceive or foresee any material impact on earnings or sudden crackdown on the market pricing because capacities are constrained.
Okay, so stock prices, the names that you mentioned, they're adequately factoring all this, Renu?
We think, yeah, they are now consolidating and valuations ought to correct for increased competition and the risk which market is discounting.
And you don't think that in other areas this is going to happen, in EMS and things like that?
No, this restriction was placed way back in 22 on power and infra segment. So power generation and T&D generation, unlikely that NTPC, which is a central government utility, or SEBs may directly use Chinese equipment. Anyway, on the BTG side, there are no domestic Chinese manufacturing facilities. If at all, they'll have to import. But private sector usually is more comfortable with Chinese vendors than state utilities like NTPC, central and state utilities. In other
Renu, back in the day, BHL and all used to, I mean, there used to be a lot of boilers and all used to come, right, from China?
Back in the days when BHL was the only manufacturer, Chinese used to have almost nearly 35% market share, but largely concentrated in the private sector hands. So private utilities or IPP players were the customers who were very keen to use Chinese vendors, both for cost and delivery timelines. In today's environment, BHL, L&T, both are full on their factories. We have seen JSW acquiring GE Power boiler facilities. So probably in the next 12-15 months, JSW should start participating, both using the boiler and the turbines which they have through Toshiba. But on the government sector contracts, we don't think, at least our perception is NTPC as a customer has never been comfortable with Chinese vendors. And I don't think so they would reopen the door. And if at all, there is a minimum localization requirement which none of the Chinese manufacturers have in India. So on the generation side, it could be imports, but that too on the private sector, nothing on the government utilities or customers front.
You know, I just want to talk about other issues with the EMS, right? I mean, memory prices surging. What does it do to companies like Dixon and others, etc.? But I'm out of time. We're running into market pre-open. Renu, thank you very much, and we'll invite you back on the program. Thanks very much for joining us here.